I was drinking for a lot of reasons, Kevin. I think I was drinking to escape the trauma of the hair loss. I think it affected me a hell of a lot more than I really knew. And I think I dealt with it strangely. Like I dealt with it, most people try and hide, right? Well, I went online and I made this persona and I lived through this person that I called Claire Balding. And she was everything I've ever wanted to be.
Welcome to HairPod, the podcast where you get to hear real people talk about their hair journeys. I'm your host, Kevin Ralston, and each week I get to interview people from different walks of life whose lives have been touched by hair loss in some form or fashion. Many of our guests have experienced hair loss themselves and found a way to get their confidence and their hair back. As some of you may know, May is Mental Health Awareness Month. A theme that arises during almost every episode of HairPod is the unforeseen impact that hair loss can have on our emotions, our stress, our daily lives, and our relationships. Losing your hair can feel devastating and isolating, but it doesn't have to stay that way. For this episode, I spoke with Claire Fullam, a Dublin-based trichologist who, like so many others, has faced the struggle and shock of dealing with rapid hair loss. Claire's search for answers and support led her to begin a bold journey as the social media presence of Claire Balding, and eventually to open her own trichology clinic. Claire discusses the impact her hair loss had on her mental health, her struggle with addiction, and her choice to pursue a career that will help give others struggling with alopecia more options and more community. Claire's path has been a rocky but inspiring one, and today, she shares with us not only what she learned about alopecia, but what alopecia has taught her about herself.
I lost all my own hair almost 8 years ago to the day. It was actually, I think, next week, 8 years ago. So I lost 90% of my hair and went on a big journey with that, a huge journey with that, and then decided, you know what? I really want to learn why this happened to me in the first place. I want to go back to college. I want to study and I want to try and understand, because I'm a big believer in things happen for a reason, and I think that there's always a reason behind some sort of pain that you go through in your life. And I think that I really wanted to understand, how was I supposed to help others going through hair loss? And, also for me, I still suffer with it. I still get patches of alopecia. So how am I going to manage this? Because I understand that it's something I'm going to have to manage. It doesn't just go away from lotion or a potion, that kind of way. So how am I supposed to manage this? So I did that. I opened my trichology clinic then 4 years ago. It's called Trua. We're an online trichology clinic. Trua means compassion os Gaeilge. So that's the Irish language. And I suppose that's what our clinic is based on, is compassion and is understanding, and trying to come at hair loss and scalp conditions from a huge, all different angles, I suppose. So that's what has led me here. So kind of, I suppose, quite a full circle story, because I visited a trichologist when my hair was falling out. I visited dermatologists, my general practitioners here in Ireland as well. And the only one who gave me that little bit of hope, to be really honest with you, was a trichologist, So it's funny, if you asked me 8 years ago, Kevin, said, Claire, what do you want to be when you grow up? it wouldn't have been a trichologist, to be honest with you. I didn't even know what one was. So it's funny where life takes you.
Let's talk about your journey, where it began. It sounds like it began with hair loss. And what age were you when that first started to appear?
Yeah, so I was 27. And I was 27, nearly 28 actually. So that's 8 years ago now. And I had 2 children who were very young at the time. I think my daughter was about 5 and my son was about 1. And I suppose I got, did everything really young. Like most of my friends, I'm nearly 37 now. Most of my friends are only starting their families and stuff now, whereas I started 13 years ago. And like that, myself and my husband, we grew up really fast. We bought a house in the area that we grew up. We raised our kids. My friends were going to college and going on nights out and traveling Europe. And I was changing nappies, and I was paying bills and I was doing all that kind of stuff. And I suppose I didn't manage my stress very well. I think that I internalized a lot of it. And I think that I tried to pretend that everything was okay because, you can't really drop a ball when you're a young parent. It's hard to drop that ball and also pick it back up. There's a lot of expectation on you as well. So I think a lot of people would say to me, God, Claire, like when your hair started to fall, like what was going on? Like was something really traumatic going on? But it wasn't. It was just life. Life is stressful and life can take its toll on you sometimes. And when you're trying to continuously juggle balls and pretend you're okay and that you're coping, I think sometimes your body is a funny way of showing you that you're not, And I think that when I first found my first patch of alopecia, I found it just in my split here. And I assumed that I'd put the curling iron or something too close to my scalp. And then I remember like this time of the year, like, coming into the summer months, well, the summer that we get in Ireland isn't spectacular, but it's slightly warmer for a couple of weeks. But, I just assumed that, around that time of the year, I lose more hair. We all do. We're like animals shedding kind of, for the summer months and stuff. So I always knew, and I had a lot of hair, big classic red head, big classic Irish head on me. And I was losing a lot of hair at that time. But again, I assumed that, that's fine. That's the time of year. But this time was different. I started to lose an extreme amount of hair. I was scooping it up in the office. I was hiding it. I was emptying the bins in the office because I was so embarrassed of it. And within 5 weeks, I was in a wig, a full-blown wig. I'd lost 90% of my hair in 5 weeks.
Did you say 90%?
90. Yeah. So I went from somebody who was hugely identified by my hair, like everyone would say, Claire with the red hair. Like that's the way people would describe me, Claire with the red hair, to having no hair, really, In 5 weeks at 27 years of age, doesn't matter what age you are, it's spectacularly stressful. I went on every radio show, every TV show that would have me trying to find this answer, I suppose. Somebody will tell me what to do. Somebody like nobody knew in my family, my friends group, nobody knew. And I remember uploading a status on Facebook to like my 400 close friends at the time. And I remember the Irish Times, it's a big national newspaper here in Ireland, picked up the story and shared the story. And from there, I suppose I started to document my hair loss online, So at the time, Snapchat was really big. Apparently it's back again with a bang with the kids. I'm too old for that now, but Snapchat at the time. And I called myself Claire Balding. And Claire Balding is a big TV personality actually over in Great Britain. And I named myself, I suppose, after her. And it's a real Irish trait to, almost slag yourself and take the mick out of yourself first before anybody else can. Does that make sense? It's like a self-deprecating kind of thing. Mm-hmm. So Claire Balding was born, and Claire Balding is still around to this day. I suppose I kind of cultivated a community and an audience, that were looking for help with hair loss as well. But then, slowly but surely it kind of became my life and just documenting my life and the ups and the downs of it. I had a large audience, somewhere about 90,000 followers on Instagram, which is big for Ireland because there's only about 10 of us in the country. So, right. it was, quite went from 0 to 90 pretty quick.
Claire's baldness was not permanent. When her hair began growing back, people assumed that she had overcome the emotional aspects of her hair loss. But her alopecia would continue to flare up, and the challenges this brought to her mental health were far from over. Her experience with hair loss had started her on a journey, and there was no turning back. She had become a public figure, and now, for better or worse, had a social identity tied to this condition.
Within about a year, my hair started to come back, which was unusual. People didn't think that was going to happen. But very, very quickly, quite, as fast as it fell out, it started to come back. Now it was white. The pigment never returned. It was a different texture, all that kind of stuff. So really, really weird one to manage. But I suppose I thought then, and especially when my hair started to come out, or even when I wore my hairpiece, when I wore my wig, people were like, oh, Claire's grand now. Like, she's fine now. She's got her hair back now. But there's so many demons, I suppose, and I suppose some of the things that were going on with my mental health, it was masking all of that a little bit. And eventually, that erupted along those years. Like, that's 8 years ago now. I'm 3 years sober, thank God. It led me to a path of addiction. And it all stemmed from my hair loss. So, I mean, as strange as that story is, Kevin, There's a lot there. I've just embarked 8 years on top of you there now. Sorry about that. But as strange as that story is, that's why I'm a great trichologist. That's why I'm great at running our business. That's why I'm passionate about scalp and hair health and people like you bringing awareness of it, because I think hair loss can sometimes get lost in this level of vanity, whereas it really, truly can affect people's lives, and not just your life and you're going through your family's life and everybody else's life as well. So it's so important to speak about it as much as possible, I think.
The stresses of life and the impact of living with alopecia continue to weigh on Claire, even as she works so hard to adapt to it and provide a community for others to do so as well. Claire began leaning on alcohol more and more.
I was drinking for a lot of reasons, Kevin. I think I was drinking to escape the trauma of the hair loss. I think it affected me a hell of a lot more than I really knew. And I think I dealt with it strangely. Like I dealt with it, most people try and hide, right? Well, I went online and I made this persona and I lived through this, person that I called Claire Balding. And she was everything I've ever wanted to be, but I was always too scared to be. So I treated her as this persona and, allowed all of life's stresses come out through her. And I did a TV show. I did countless live shows all around Ireland. And all the time, my drinking just kept getting a little bit bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger,
Mm-hmm.
But I suppose and look, we have a culture here as well, that we rely on it a lot. And it's a deep rooted issue within Ireland that we run from, and a lot of people, especially what age was I then, like 33, it's very young to kind of, I suppose, face these demons a little bit, but I knew that if I didn't, I'd die.
Like many people who find themselves struggling with addiction, Claire was not fully aware that she had a problem. By all appearances, Claire had it all together. She was a mother, a wife, a business owner, not to mention her hair had come back. It can be hard to recognize that you've even got a substance abuse problem when it's so normalized by the society around you. It wasn't until she heard a familiar voice on the radio that Claire was able to face her budding addiction and turn things around.
I remember hearing on the radio, I was sitting I was working in my front room in my kitchen, and I remember the radio came on, and again, a really famous program in Ireland, and I heard somebody I knew on the radio, and she was talking about her own alcoholism. And I was like, oh my God, like I didn't know Sophie suffered with alcoholism at all. Like I didn't realize this. I'd met Sophie. She's a podcast in Ireland. She's very well known. She's an author. She's a brilliant person, and I didn't have any idea that Sophie was struggling so much. So I remember going so close to the radio. It was actually a radio. It wasn't like a Siri or a My Google. It was an actual radio in my kitchen, right? And I remember I went up to it and it was as if I could feel Sophie's breath coming through the radio and talking to me. And I remember holding my own hand as if I was holding hers. And every single thing she said, I was like, oh my God, she's describing me. She's describing my life. She described this, that every day she lit this fire in her own home. And every day she tried to control it, and she knew that if she let it get out of control, it would ravage her and her home and her boys and her husband. But she kept lining it every day and she couldn't understand why she was doing this to herself. And I just remember that analogy stuck with me. And I said, geez, Claire, what are you doing? There was no rock bottom for me, Kevin. I think it was more like a real deep realization. I remember I went to my first AA meeting. It was 2021, so there was no physical AA meetings really because it was still COVID times back then, of course. And I went to my first one on St. Patrick's Day of all days. And I remember it was actually, all my friends were having pints, and I was sitting on my bed crying at the spectacle. I was like, oh my God. But,
what a day to begin.
Yeah, but I'll never forget it, I suppose. It's a good one, But I remember it was actually an American AA meeting because I was too scared to go to an Irish one. So I joined an American link because I was nobody would know me over there. This would be fine, And it was a real eye opener, And I think that my hair loss started that. Maybe not started it. I always loved to drink, And I think, again, being a young parent, when I'd get a night off, I'd go wild, because I had a night off.
Yeah.
And I was always the friend who had a story. I was always the friend who went too far. I was always a big drinker, but I think the hair loss didn't help. And then having this big community online, the pressure of that didn't help either, and I think that it kind of came to a point. And when you recognize yourself in somebody else, it's so important. That's why I think these stories are so important, because somebody else will hear this and say, oh, that's me, or that's her, or that's him, and their family. So sharing those stories are hugely important. They'll save people's lives, Again, like as I said earlier on, like it's funny where life brings you, isn't it? Because hair balding was such a painful thing for me for a while. I say she, like she's a different person, but it was a painful place, because you can only be on top for so long, and what comes up must come down. So even though people are very fond of you, they might have a different opinion on one thing than you, and social media can be cruel. It can be a cruel place, So I think I ran from her for a while. I took 6 months off social media, and I said, you know what, Claire, you're going to have to sort yourself out. And that's when I started, my sober journey, thank God, and started that whole process then as well, So it's given me huge strength.
Talking with Claire has been such a great reminder of how important community can be, especially when it comes to mental health support. It can be so comforting and inspiring to discover that we are not alone in our experience, and to learn from those who have already walked the path. If you want to hear more from Claire, make sure you subscribe to the show, because we're going to be having her back on to discuss living with alopecia. And make sure you check out our show notes for links to follow Claire on social media. Thanks for listening to another episode of HairPod. Check us out at Hair Club on Instagram, or search HairPod on Facebook to continue this conversation. If you know somebody who could benefit from hearing this episode, we would love it if you would share it with them. If you're enjoying the show, consider leaving us a rating and review on Apple Podcasts or your favorite podcast app. We also have a website. Check it out by going to podcast.hairclub.com. We're here to build people up and share real stories of people experiencing hair loss, so they feel a little bit less alone. And when you share, review, and subscribe, it helps us do just that. So thank you. Until next time.